Well, hello again, folks. It is part 2 of Strategic Bombing Week, and if you didn't see Don Russell's amazing presentation last night, you should go back and watch it. It was a masterclass in how to take a personal story but build it into the context of the 8th Air Force bombing Germany, and just really, really amazing. And the detail was incredible. And another similarly good show tonight. So James Jefferies, you may remember from the Bomber Command aspect of the Battle of Britain. He's at Essex University, and good evening, James. How are you doing?
Good evening. I'm doing very well, thank you. Yeah, the weather's been absolutely miserable, but yeah, it's. I'm really looking forward to being back and talking about this.
Well, I mean, and before we're going to dive into the actual history part of it, when you're studying all sorts of aspects of the Royal Air Force in World War II, particularly the kind of the bomber side of things, what appealed in a sense about this particular operation? I mean, there's so many to choose from. Is it because it's early? Did you find the early war more interesting than the late war? I know this is kind of mid-war, really, but
yeah,
how did you find it?
Well, I kind of like these more unusual moments of the war, these unusual raids. So I recently gave a talk about the Augsburg raid, infamously the Lancasters that attacked Augsburg in daylight to hit the U-boat factory there, which is really out there, really unusual, especially low-level daylight Lancasters. And this kind of fits in with that without giving too much away. But it is one of those raids, I say, it's low level, it's at daylight, heavily publicized at the time. Yet it's one of those raids that has just kind of slipped the general memory of the air war, I feel. And I thought, I want to know more about this, and I'd like to share it, really.
And do you think it slipped through the cracks a bit because there was maybe bigger and better to come for the Royal Air Force? Because, as we talked with Don Russell last night, 42, 43, it's still the learning our craft stage of the air war into Europe, and there was to be much bigger and more successful, arguably, raids to come. And this one kind of in that area where there's some good days and there's some bad days, because we're still learning the skills. And by 45, when we've got Tony Redding on later in the week talking about the bombing of Germany in April 45, and by then the Luftwaffe opposition has dropped down dramatically, and we're putting big and the sizable raids on. But yeah, it's a learning curve. The 5 years, sort of 39, 40 up to 45, was a massive, great learning curve. And this Operation Oyster is one of those ones that's on that chart of improvement, and interesting in its own right, of course. But also you can chart that development and progression. So we'll kind of duly commence the preparation. You've got us some stuff ready here. So what are we talking about? I'll hand over to you, then I will, as I always do, come in with interruptions just to annoy you, basically.
Please do. Please, it's not annoying at all. It's wonderful. No, so basically, yeah, this is Operation Oyster that takes place on the 6th of December, 1942, on the Philips factory in Eindhoven. So I thought I'd talk briefly about what was the Philips factory. So initially it came about in the late 19th century, making light bulbs. And you can see on the right there's an image, a poster advertising Philips and the light bulbs, etc. But this factory grew. The revenue was huge. It was a big hub for people coming to Eindhoven, and the town really benefited from it. Huge employment there. And in fact, an interesting fact that I found out was PSV Eindhoven, the football club, came out of the success of the factory, the growing of the factory, this identity that builds up within Eindhoven linked to the factory. So if you just move on to slide 2, obviously, May 1940, the Netherlands is occupied by Nazi Germany, and they grab hold of the infrastructure that's in the Netherlands, which is going to include the Philips factory. Now, since their light bulbs, they've moved on progressively to working on radios, especially radio valves. You can see it's an obvious progression, can't you? Yeah. And at this point in the war, in 1942, they are the largest producer of radio valves in Nazi Germany and are accounting for about a third. So a third of all radio valves are for Nazi Germany coming from this factory in Eindhoven. So, and again, if we look at the next slide, the RAF pick up on this. They pick up on this. They realize the importance of the factory, what it was before the war, how big it was. And it's in April 1942 that the Bomb Target Committee officially say that Eindhoven, the Philips factory there, should be targeted alongside the port of Rotterdam. So it is right up there. It is a prime target. And I mean, you think about what's going on sort of April 1942, throughout 42, leading up to the raid. I think you can say it's probably one of the bleakest moments in the war. You think about what's happening in Russia. We haven't had the Battle of Stalingrad yet. We haven't had El Alamein. You know, the Americans haven't really come in yet. And you've got, you know, this happening. So it's about hitting Germany, Nazi Germany, where it really hurts. And the Philips factory is definitely going to do some damage. And it's the group that's selected to do it are, of course, Bomber Command. And it's 2 Group. Now, I did talk about 2 Group briefly in my Battle of Britain talk. So 2 Group, they generally fly what we would call the lighter bombers, the lighter medium bombers. So, for instance, in the Battle of Britain, they attacked the barges with Blenheims, 2-engined aircraft, light bomb load. And throughout 1941 into 1942, they take part in these huge raids over northern France, over Belgium, over Holland, with huge fighter escorts to draw up the Luftwaffe. And that's really what they've been doing. And I mean, you asked me earlier about what appeals about this raid is partly it's 2 Group. I'm reading about them in the Battle of Britain and their incredible story of what they did. It's kind of again progressing from that, wanting to know more about what they did. So I think now I'll kind of talk about the aircraft that they used, and just quickly to say that this raid is a maximum effort by 2 Group. It's pretty much almost the entire group that are going in. This is how important it is. And as I say, the effort is absolutely huge.
And that's also at that stage of the war where there's no strength in depth.
Yeah.
You know, later on, the RAF could put bigger raids on and still leave lots of aircraft back in the home and replace them. If that's at this point of the war, if something goes wrong, you kind of lose everything, don't you? It's in a sense.
Yeah, it's like the 1,000 bomber raid on Cologne. You're getting operational training units in. You're getting everything you actually can to reach that number. Not like later on in the war where, you know, as you say, there is that capacity. I mean, yeah, the United States Army Air Force aren't in the numbers that we think of. And I think actually when we think of Bomber Command, we generally think of a post Dam Busters raid Bomber Command. I think we think of, you know, of later on during the war.
I think generally Bomber Command is associated with 4-engine heavies. I think you ask most people, that's the image that comes in. The Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, the Lancaster going over, even the Halifax gets second to that, although James' wonderful show on the Halifax a few weeks ago did really well. But yeah, we don't think of Bomber Command in terms of the smaller aircraft for some reason. It's just not how the public, I think, generally see it.
Yeah, I mean, that ties in with lots of things. I think the Dam Busters film is huge in that, you know, and the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight has a Lancaster. It's just more in the public sphere, isn't it? You know, so you do forget about Venturas and Bostons and Blenheims and Hamdens and all these other aircraft that came beforehand. But if we just go to the next slide, I'll talk about the aircraft that are used, and one of them is the Lockheed Ventura, which is American design. It will be flown by 21 Squadron, 464 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force, and 487 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force. I don't have a lot of nice things to say about this aircraft, if I'm perfectly honest.
It's a stopgap, isn't it, really? Let's be honest.
It's 100% a stopgap, yeah. It's slow, it's sluggish. Interestingly enough, for a raid that's going to be at low level, that's where it handles really poorly. So it's bad, let alone at normal heights, but at low level, it's especially prone to stalling. And it lasts in the RAF about a year. It doesn't last that long. You know, it hasn't left a legacy for the Royal Air Force, this aircraft. And interesting enough, as I say, at this point, it is a stopgap. 47 are used in the raid and make up most of the aircraft, you know, in this raid, which again is unusual. You know, it's just, as I say, what's going for it? I mean, it's got a reasonable bomb load for that time in the war. 833.
What's going for is we have them. That's it. We have them. That's it. We're looking in the pantry, and that's all. Is it? It's those days, and all you've got is a tin of old baked beans to have for dinner. And okay, that's what we've got. We have to use it. There's nothing more to say about it. It is what it is. Yeah,
absolutely. So then I'll go slightly up the scale in the aircraft with the next one, which is the Douglas Boston. which again is a slightly forgotten about aircraft, I'd say, in popular memory, etc. It's going to be flown by 88 Squadron, 107 Squadron, and 226 Squadron in this raid. As I say, it's another US design. Interesting aspect of it is it's got a tricycle wheel platform. It's not a tail dragger, so it's a little bit more modern in that sense. Slightly better armed, and the thing that is very interesting about this aircraft is it has 4 303 machine guns that fire from the front that the pilot can fire, which is again slightly unusual, especially for aircraft that came before for Bomber Command. So it can strafe as it goes into the attack. And there are 36 that are going to be in this raid. And I have to say, I've got a little bit of a soft spot for this aircraft. It's not the best, but and it is used, on D-Day and the Normandy landings, etc.
I think that's where most people know is that famous photo of them flying over Pointe du Hoc, which was just a few in the days before D-Day. I think that was the Havoc variant, which is, I forget what's the difference in Havoc and Boston, but
I think it's just the American and the
different names. But I think that's where it's got a bit of immortality there. But yeah, it's definitely improvement from the first aircraft. But it is what it is.
Yeah, as I say, I think it was sort of a stopgap, but it ended up being a useful aircraft, and I'm now going to lead to the next aircraft, which, I mean, I'm sure everyone recognizes this aircraft watching, or most of you do. It is the de Havilland Mosquito, the Wooden Wonder, used by 105 Squadron and 139 Squadron in this raid. I mean, what an incredible aircraft. I think there's a little bit of I won't say a myth, but there's a thing about this aircraft, a longevity about it, through it being the Wooden Wonder. I mean, the speed of it is incredible. Nearly 400 miles an hour. Its top speed is just, that's pretty much the same as an FW190 fighter, which is the top Luftwaffe fighter probably at that time. I say I've got the bomb load there of 4,000 pounds. That was actually on adapted Mosquitoes. The ones in this raid were 2,000 pounds, but the fact that it could carry that is incredible. And I think that's almost half the capacity of a Lancaster, or an average load of a Lancaster, and I think not far off, and that almost is similar to a B-17 as well. 2-man crew, fast, and it came into its own in so many ways. These sort of hit and run raids. It comes in as a pathfinder as well. It's got good height, good speed, and as a fighter as well as a bomber, it's just incredible. And I mean, what more can I say?
It's interesting. It started off good at everything, and then as they went for the later marks, each model, the reconnaissance ones, the fighter bombers one, they got even better. I mean, it started with kind of 9 out of 10, and then just the gradual tweaks just turned it into a 10 out of 10. I mean, the only thing that there was we didn't have a few more thousand of them, and we'd have been laughing. I mean, the fact the Americans started using it was, I think, says everything, doesn't it? I mean, not in huge numbers, but absolutely amazing aircraft. And just what can you say about the Mosquito? Just amazing.
Absolutely. And I say I've got a huge soft spot for the Mosquito as well. I think it's absolutely incredible. And infamously in 633 Squadron, that adds to the myth, doesn't it, of people seeing it in the 1960s, etc. So now just moving on to the next is talking a little bit about the plan. So as I say, these aircraft are going to go in at low level. So low level in daylight for accuracy, and also to try and escape some of the defenses. Try and, duck under some elements of radar. That's the idea really behind it. Now, one interesting aspect of this is that all these aircraft cruise and fly at very different speeds. So there's a very strong imperative to get these timings absolutely right, crossing the coast and going onto the target. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. They'll fly in pairs. When they make the attacks, and they've got a mixture of bombs. They've got incendiary, they've got high explosive, they've got delayed action fuses, they've got general purpose, to really throw in everything, to really make sure that this is hit. And interestingly enough, like I say, I've got a picture on the left there of some cameras. I'm not sure if they're 100% the right cameras that would have been used on the raid. I just like the image, so I thought I'd put it there. The raid would be filmed on camera, and it is in, there's some brilliant Pathé News clips of this, which are on YouTube, and I really recommend it. You see how low these aircraft fly. It is just absolutely incredible, and the footage is so unique because it was so important, and it was, let's make a big thing of this.
And
raid.
is there any consideration about limiting civilian casualties? Because this is the Netherlands we're talking about, not Germany. So, you know, they're an occupied nation, but you're saying about the low level and daylight for that accuracy. Is any of that to do with civilians, or is that just really not part of our remit at the time?
There's a little bit. I've read different things about this, and I can't see anything official to say that, or I haven't come across it, and I would welcome anybody to show that to. But I haven't been able to find anything official to say that. And actually, the original raid was going to take place, I think, on the Thursday before, but because of bad weather, has moved to the Sunday. And there's a bit of a myth that it was always going to be on that Sunday to avoid civilian casualties, but that's not actually true. So yeah, it's a little bit hazy. I like to think there was a consideration. Possibly.
I mean, even not if not officially, you'd imagine the briefings, they would have been reminded, you know, this is ultimately a country that's occupied. The people there are not our enemies. The factory is our target. You know, just maybe remind the crews that there's that slight bit of extra pressure, I suppose.
Definitely,
it's the Netherlands, not Germany. I was, yesterday with Don Russell talking about the Netherlands being seen often as the kind of the route to Germany, but this, of course, is actually the target, which is a bit different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, now I just want to talk now about what was happening. So if you go to the next slide, we've got at the same time some diversionary raids that are taking place. One by 66 B-17 Flying Fortresses, which you can see on the left there, escorted by Spitfires, which I've got another picture of Spitfires on the right. I've got to get some Spitfires in there somewhere, so do forgive me for throwing those in. There's also Mustangs from 264 Squadron that are sweeping over the north of the raid to try and divert fighters. And there's some B-24s that are attacking the Luftwaffe airfield at Abbeville to keep them busy, to try and keep them on the ground, keep their heads down, keep them busy, essentially. Now, there was another plan involving the Spitfires, which is that they would meet up with the returning bombers on the Dutch coast and escort them back home. They couldn't go any further because this is really the limit of the Spitfire's range, and we haven't really had the developments to get those long-range fighters as of yet, which is, I mean, an absolute huge thing later on in the war, which is severely lacking, actually, really by both sides. You know, that's one of the failures of the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain, is the range of the Messerschmitt 109, infamously. You know, so that's essentially what's going to be happening alongside the raid. But I'd just like to move on now to a practice raid. So the crews have been briefed about a similar sort of path, or similar sort of flight plan on the 17th of November, which is going to be on Little Barford Power Station, which you can see there, and is quite an obvious little target, really, isn't it? Obviously, just to clarify, they're not actually going to bomb it. They're just going to fly over it. If anyone's thinking that. This is really to ensure timings. This is to ensure that the route matches up, that, you know, this sort of thing is going to work. And unfortunately, it's something of a mess. There is bad weather. There are mistakes in navigation and timing, and they find that the formation flying is quite tricky, which is one of the reasons why they switched to flying in pairs, I believe. So they go again. They have second practice the next day, making a few small changes. This time they have Spitfires acting as enemy, pretend to intercept them. And it's a real traffic jam. So there's about 100 aircraft involved in this raid, and they are flying all over the place. And by all accounts, there were a few near misses. And I mean, can you imagine seeing that if you're walking your dog along the side of the factory, seeing all of these aircraft coming out of nowhere? I mean, wow, what an absolute spectacle. And there's something else that happens, which is not expected and is something worth noting for later. But there is an issue with birds at that low level that seem to dive away or dive in front of the aircraft as soon as they see them coming. And quite a few of the birds were hit. But as I say, that's something to remember later on. So then if we just move on again, it's really important, the navigators, because it's at low level, they're using a lot of the land, they're using landmarks really to get themselves there alongside with their maps, etc. So reconnaissance Mosquito goes over the target and takes photos leading up and over the target, and they're given to the navigators of the aircraft to study. And apparently this is it's now embedded in their minds. They focus completely on this, which I think, you know, is very worth mentioning, that this is very, very important to hit that target. You know, this is the huge thing. And then the final plan is laid in that the Bostons will attack on the 0 hour at 12:30, 12 on the main factory and 24 on the valve and lamp factory. So there are actually 2 targets that are being targeted in this raid, but very close to each other. And then the Mosquitoes, which I might abbreviate to Mozzies, by the way, every now and again, just because it's out of habit. But they're going to attack the main factory 2 minutes after that. So this is really, really quick stuff. And then the Venturas, which are the slowest aircraft of the lot, will come in 6 minutes later with 24 on the main factory and 12 on the valve and lamp factory. And as I say, it's really important that these timings go ahead. It's imperative, really, and using the lie of the land, getting that accuracy. So yeah, if we just go to the next couple of images. As I say, the raid was initially going to take place on Thursday, 3rd of December, but there's bad weather, and it meant a delay, and it results in going ahead on the 6th. The aircraft take off between 11:15 and 11:30, so it's quite a reasonably quick flight. At this point, 2 Bostons have to abandon the attack, both of 88 Squadron, but the rest form up over East Anglia, over the Norfolk and Suffolk coast, and proceed to fly to the Netherlands. Now, the picture on the left is actually from the raid. This is taken during the raid, and you can see just how low those aircraft are. I mean, you only have to hiccup and you end up in the sea, don't you? I mean, officially they're flying at 100 feet, but often they were a lot lower. And you see this in the photographs and you see this in the film, that they are flying a lot lower. And I mean, if you're not going to be staring really to see how high you are. And also at that point in the war, the means of measuring height, especially at low level, weren't that accurate. So you really went by, I don't know what the phrase would be, whether it's not dead reckoning, but you would go by what you would think it would be.
And apparently that's harder in the winter when it's more grey, and you don't.
Yeah.
In the summer, there's greater contrast, better sunlight. In the winter, it's worse. Apparently, I remember reading that somewhere.
Yes.
And is this in radio silence or not?
Yes. Radio silence along the way. Obviously, the crews could speak to each other within the aircraft.
Yeah.
But yeah, the standard was radio silence. So you're following your leader. You're flying in your pairs and going by the landmarks, etc. Once you get over to the Netherlands. So now, again, moving on, we'll talk about when they reach the Dutch coast. And again, the top left image is a still from one of the movies that was taken. They reach Dutch coast and proceed to fly to Eindhoven from the south. So they're south, heading northwards towards the Eindhoven and the factory. These are the Bostons leading, and they're guided by a railway track, which they find by seeing the smoke from a train that's going along the tracks. As I say, meanwhile, the diversion raids are going ahead and to draw away enemy fighters, and one FW-190 fighter is shot down. You've got the image there on the right. It's not from the raid, it's just of an FW-190 being shot down. In
fact, we discussed that photo with Matt Bone on Conflict on Camera. We did that.
Oh, I did not know that.
I think it's the same photo. Matt would go, it's not, because to me it looks like the same photo, and I think that was over somewhere Brittany way, San Malo or something.
Oh, okay.
If that's the same photo, if Matt's watching this, I've got it wrong. I do apologize, Matt. But it does look like a photo we discussed on Conflict on Camera. But I'm not an aviation guy, so people will go, "Oh, it isn't, Woody, you idiot!" But it looks like it is to me. But I don't know.
Well, that's fascinating. Yeah,
and Neil says it is the same photo. I feel validated there. No, it's good. Yeah,
brilliant.
Phew.
Yeah, as I say, that one FW190 is shot down, and 2 US bombers are shot down. So they've drawn away fighters, you know, but as the bombers, the RAF bombers cross the coast, they're met by large numbers of birds. I think you're probably thinking I was going to say German fighters, but no, birds. They're scared, and they're in larger numbers than the ones over the factory in the practice raid, and they start flying into the bombers. And in total, by the end of the raid, 23 bombers are damaged because of these birds that are flying into the aircraft. Some went through the perspex, you know, some went into sort of like the propellers hitting the main fuselage, and some crew members were actually wounded, and there's accounts of them being wounded by these birds. I read that there's one aircraft, a Ventura, that's thought to have crashed because of a bird flying into it, but I've also read that it was hit by flak, so I'm not 100% sure on that. But these birds that were in the practice raid that proved a nuisance are actually an absolute annoying nuisance and incredibly dangerous during the raid itself. Yeah, again, that's worth mentioning. And again, that kind of says just again how low they were flying. You know, that these birds were flying into them.
Yeah, if you're going like yesterday when we talked with Don Russell about B-17s flying at 15,000 feet, you're not going to get not many birds up that high. Aliens possibly, but no birds up that high. So it's interesting that and worth considering the varying problems of different altitudes of bombings and different types of aircraft, and bird strike as is something I'm guessing they'd not been thinking about in the initial stages of that. Certainly not. It's something in quantity. Yeah. I'm now thinking of a scene in Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade with
oh crikey, yeah,
Sean Connery on the beach. Yeah, but
I don't think it was. I don't think it was Henry Jones with an umbrella doing this, but yeah.
Well, we never know.
We never know. This is how these rumors start, isn't it? Anyway.
We've started something now, James. The World War II TV makes connection that Indiana Jones's father was collaborating with the Nazis and actually helped bring down birds in 1942. To be fair, the Indiana Jones timeline does not explain where Henry Jones is in 1942. For all we know, he could have been. We're going to let's get out of that rabbit hole now, James.
Yeah. You're getting me thinking now. Yeah. So anyway, we'll just move on to the next slide. So that's them crossing the coast. Now the Venturas, as I say, are poor aircraft. I'm going to be polite. They're poor aircraft. And they stray too far south of their route and ran into heavy defenses, ran into flak, and ran into fighters. And you can see a better picture there of an FW190. A Ventura was lost for 487 Squadron. And one was lost for 464 Squadron, but the second one, flown by Sergeant Moss, who was an Australian, managed to belly land. Again, I'm not sure if this image on the left is from the raid itself, but it's a belly landed Ventura, just to give people a visual aid.
Yeah.
And all the crew were taken prisoner. And as 48 Squadron got deeper into the Netherlands, another was shot down by flak, and another was badly damaged. This was flown by Pilot Officer Abbott. Despite being damaged, he carried on flying to the target, which is a common thing you see. It's often called the press-on spirit, because it's like, you've come so far, let's carry on. Let's stick through and do the duty, and you do see it a lot.
Would there have been some kind of because you said they were going to be flying in pairs, so is there a thing like if you lose the other person of your pair, perhaps as soon as you hit the enemy coast, you should return, or I wonder whether there was a different set of rules as you get closer and closer to the target, or whether it was individual initiative or decision. I don't know. We had it yesterday with Don Russell talking about this 10-minute rule that an aircraft, his grandfather's aircraft, ended up taking off 10 minutes after the 10-minute rule and tried desperately to catch up with the rest of the formation. So it broke their own rules. So I wonder whether there's anything in place for this. Again, at the briefing, you'd imagine there'd have been pilots putting their hands up saying, so if I lose my partner, what's my duty, sir?
Generally, with these sort of things, it was turn back if your aircraft's hit. But
that's what I'd be thinking.
Yeah. Crews normally, when we come this far, don't want to let people down. You know, the other thing is, I think there's probably fear of being branded a coward as well if you come back. You know, I mean, there's infamously, I think it's the Dambusters raid where one of the Lancasters comes back with its bomb, ordered to, because the bomb is top secret. You don't want it going into, you know. And I think Gibson absolutely rips into this pilot saying you should have pressed on, even though the aircraft wasn't. It's just that thing, you know, that fear of having that stamped on you. If you make it, it goes towards your tour, which is one less mission to go through. There's loads of factors that could affect it, really. It depends on the individual. But generally, crews, as I say, pressed on in these sort of situation, you know, the infamous LMF, you know, being one of the terms used, lack of moral fibre, which was a real
I mean, it's interesting because this, with, you know, we talk about morale, but it's also peer pressure. Morale is a positive way of looking at it. Peer pressure is maybe a negative way. I mean, it's I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole either, but you can imagine, you know, with the age of these people, 22, 23 and less, you know, you don't want to let anybody down. You feel this pressure, but yeah, it is interesting, fascinating. I think I always do that. What would I do in that situation? You know, would you press on? It's and at what point do you not press on? It's fascinating stuff, but then it reminds you that they're humans thinking all the time, and I love this.
Absolutely, and I mean, that's the other thing, age, isn't it? You know, you think how young they are. I mean, me in my 30s, you know, would run a mile, you know, because I just I don't know. So for them to press on at 19, 20 years old, it is perhaps that mentality, that peer pressure, that no fear, you know, which I think I won't say that I was like that at 19, 20, but, you know, you were a little bit, fear was a little bit alien in some respects, wasn't it? But it's just incredible. It's just absolutely incredible. But yes, there is some issues in the fact that one FW-190 spots the Venturas after it had been engaged with the B-17s, and one is shot down. But again, it manages to belly land, and one of the crewmen was killed, with the others becoming POWs. So really, you know, this little section here is about the Venturas getting into a lot of trouble, and it's not going to get much better either, without saying some spoilers. But we'll move on now to a little bit about the Bostons and the Mosquitoes. So now the Bostons bump into some FW-190s, and it was reported that they could see the German fighters taking off from one of the airfields, swooping up into the air, and then swooping round to attack the bombers. But luckily, the Mosquitoes, because they're in effect 2 minutes ahead of them, saw the fighters as well, and used their speed. So two of the Mosquitoes broke off to get the FW-190s away. So the Germans see the aircraft, they go straight for them, and took many away from the Bostons, as I say. These two Mosquitoes ended up coming home because they took the FW-190s away. They were out of the mission now because of the crucialness of the timing, etc. But the result of this was that it could have been a lot worse for the Bostons if these FW-190s hadn't been taken away. Although a couple were damaged, the majority were distracted, and I think I think it's worth
reminding as well that, you know, a two-seat bomber with the Mozzie can take on at speed a Focke-Wulf 190 and know it's got a fighting chance of doing it. I mean, in 42, I mean, this is compared to the as you said earlier, the Ventura kind of has no redeeming features really. The Mozzie at least is fast. The Boston, I would say, is pretty sturdy. It's kind of it can take a bit of punishment. The Ventura kind of has nothing that you'd say, well, that's its advantage. It's just kind of scores poorly on everything. But to think that we've got a bomber that in 42 that can, in the right conditions, outpace a Focke-Wulf 190 is pretty incredible.
Oh, it absolutely is, and it is credit. And like you say, this is 1942. I mean, 2 years after the Battle of Britain, and you've got an aircraft like the Mosquito being used by the RAF as a bomber and a fighter. It's just absolutely incredible. And credit again, actually, as you say, the Boston, by all accounts, crews that flew it spoke very favorably of it. I've not really come across anything to suggest otherwise. You know, they speak affectionately of it. Less said about the Ventura, the better. But yeah, the Boston, good, reliable aircraft, you know.
Yeah.
So now we're going to just move on to the attack itself. So the Bostons are leading. 88 Squadron is at the front, and it's led by Wing Commander James Pelly Fry, who is pictured there in a very dashing, typical RAF aircrew manner with the scarf and flying jacket. I absolutely love that image. Now he's using the railway line as a guide, and you've got this footage on the Pathé News where you see the Boston swooping, and you can see the buildings, you can see them approach the factory. It's just, and it's going to be so quick. All of this is so quick. Even when you watch the film, you're going, wow, everything's just coming at them so quickly. As I said, they spotted the railway track, approached the factory, and machine gunned the defenses with those 4 guns at the front of the Bostons, which is, again, you know, puts the wind up the defenses, gets them ducking for cover. Another plus point for the Boston. But obviously the defenses are awake, and they do start shooting at the bombers. Now the first few bombers drop their bombs about 100 feet. So they're really, really, really low bombing. But the subsequent bombers, including the Mosquitos and the Venturas and the last few Bostons, climb beforehand to about 1,000 feet, about 1,000 to 1,500 feet, and then dive down. And I think this has got to do a little bit with making sure, you know, there's more accuracy. So the leading crews would be the higher trained crews, the more experienced crews. And that's another reason really to improve accuracy. And also you've got to think the defenses are going to be ready now. So if you've got that bit of speed, you know, you can dive up and dive down and then swoop up to get away from the defenses. Pelly Fry's aircraft is actually hit, but he flies on, and he and his crew manage to drop their bombs. The sky is being described again as being filled, absolutely filled with aircraft weaving and making their attacks. I mean, it would have been, again, an absolutely breathtaking, incredible sight. A Boston of 226 Squadron is hit by flak and crashes into the sea on the way home. And sadly, all 4 crew members were killed. And they're remembered at the Runnymede Memorial for air crew. But I think we'll just move on to the next section, where I'm going to talk a little bit about when the Mosquitoes attack. So you've got the image there of the factory complexes being bombed, and you can see the damage already that's happening. You can see extensively that it's been hit, that it's burning, that, you know, it's been a success. I just think this is an absolutely incredible image.
It's amazing that the accuracy was there, but it's also equally amazing that the photo exists and is so clear as well. I mean, it just absolutely astonishing. There's a record of this.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I mean, look at that. You don't really see photos like that, do you, of raids? Or I rarely come across them that show that sort of damage with that clarity. As I say, they dive in. They're 2 minutes later. One Mosquito breaks formation because some FW-190s turn up, takes them away. Another jettisons its bombs before making the attack to evade some FW-190s. And was severely shot up, but it does manage to make it back to England. And a further Mosquito is hit by ground fire and unfortunately crashes on its way back to England, and both crew are killed. This is the only Mosquito that's lost in the raid, which is testament again to the Mosquito as an aircraft, you know, surviving these sorts of things.
Yeah, definitely. And do you know what provision was made, if any, for as repeated bombers hit the target and you've got smoke? I mean, have they studied what might be happening to the factory? Because with valves and fuses and things, do you get black smoke? Do you get grey smoke? Will you fire? Because you're saying they're throwing all sorts of stuff, high explosives, incendiaries. Because I know you said the later bombers were diving in, but there could be a lot of smoke around. What's the kind of the order of the day, and if you can't later on see the target?
Well, that's the issue, and that's going to come up in the next slide.
Have I preempted it? Have I? Yeah.
You have preempted it. Yeah, you're one step ahead as usual. So yeah, the next slide obviously is now the Ventura.
We've got We'll go back to the footage in a minute. We'll do that in a minute.
Yeah.
Whenever you want, when you want to do the footage of the, you let me know. But yeah,
we can do it after this slide.
Okay.
Apologies. Yeah. So now the Venturas come into the fray after the Mozzies. They're 6 minutes later, and one of the problems is it's covered in smoke. It's thick black grey smoke. It's huge fires, and they're being shot at as well. They're weaving. They're trying to get out of the way, and they're as I say, they're shot at from the ground, and 4 are shot down over the target. Over the target area. One seems to have stalled after it hit the target and it tried to swoop out. But the poor performance of Ventura, it might have been hit as well, meant that, as I say, it stalled, crashed to the ground, and all of the crew were killed. Another aircraft crashes into one of the factory buildings as a result of the smoke, of the confusion, of the pile up, of, you know, all these aircraft being there. One aircraft as well is seen to drop its bombs too low, and the resulting explosions, the fractures and debris hit the aircraft, and it catches fire and crashes. And again, all of the crew are lost. And 9 Venturas in total fail to return. Say 4 are shot down over the target. Its loss rate is about 20%. So 1 in 5 don't make it home, which is, yeah, I mean, that's absolutely horrific, really, in terms of numbers.
Yeah, Martin Harley asked, because you said 2 mosquitoes. How many mosquitoes was it in total again?
It was 10 mosquitoes in total, yeah, and 1 was lost. So that's one in 10. But this is 1 in 5, and I mean, yeah, this is really it for the Ventura as an aircraft, really. But I think we can watch the video now.
Yeah, and just, I mean, we can either address this question now or later. But Scott Grimwood asked whether this raid was studied in advance of Operation Jericho. The year later, or whether there's any kind of connection between the 2 operations, which, of course, for those who don't know, that's the prison in Amiens. It's got a sort of similarity, but that's not the same group, though, is it? If I remember,
it's not. No. So that's changed by then. I would imagine it. I can't say for certain, but I imagine it almost certainly would have been. And this raid, one of the legacies of it is discovering the Mosquito and discovering that it can do these quick hit and run attacks. So I almost certainly would have said, yeah, they would have come up with that plan and gone, we've got the perfect aircraft for this, because it's been used in raids like this.
We have, thanks to Edwin Popken, who's been on World War II TV a number of times, Operation Veritable and Wolf Hazer and Hell's Highway, who lives not very far away from Eindhoven. I could have asked Neil as well to do it, but Edwin offered to go out there and take some footage of the area today. And we've got some footage later on of the cemetery and the monument. So I'll play this now. So this is the wonders of World War II TV, and now I've got my fiber connection. I can do this now. I can put these videos in. It's just wonderful to be able to bring a bit of a sense to those who haven't been to Eindhoven exactly what the area is like. And you can see there's Edwin holding up a photo, and there's the same building now, which is yeah. So thank you, Edwin, for doing that. It's a little bonus. James is great. His PowerPoint's great, but nothing like a bit of footage to color things up a bit.
And this is incredible for me, having read about it and seeing that and hearing about, the Ventura that crashed into the building and seeing it. It's just making it so much more real. I haven't been to Eindhoven yet, and this is just, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the first bit of clip there. We've got 2 more coming up later on.
God,
so are we on to this one now? Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah. So this is now, they bombed the target. The aircraft are flying home. They're chased by FW-190s, and there are more birds on the coast that fly up and hit the aircraft, as I mentioned earlier. And the whole raid, 23 of the aircraft were hit by birds in some way. Pelly-Fry, who led the attack, his plane, as I said, was hit just before attacking the target. His aircraft actually goes off course. Now, he's the leading aircraft, and initially the following aircraft follow him, and he goes way off course, and then he notices, that they're following him. He breaks radio silence and says, "Guys, overtake me. My aircraft, I can't keep it straight and level." But he does manage to come home to England, which is wonderful news, obviously. 2 Bostons crash in fields in East Anglia, but all the crews survive. 1 Mosquito is damaged by a bird crashing through the cockpit. So again, these birds are absolutely causing chaos. And the Venturas finally have a bit of luck. So they managed to bump into the Spitfire escort. And again, I've got a lovely image of Spitfires in formation there. And yeah, the Spitfires deter the FW-190s that are initially chasing. So they do their job. They work. And it really must hit home now that, you know, a long range escort fighter has to come into the fray. And I mean, you know, the Mosquito, obviously, it's still being used mainly as a bomber at this point. You know, that's a future thing, but it does ram home this importance, you know. As I say, one Ventura is badly shot up, and it's spotted by one of the Spitfires that decides to fly alongside his big buddy and protect him. Eventually, the Ventura can't go on anymore, and it's forced to ditch in the sea. And I love this story because the Spitfire flies away and flies over a shipping trawler, swoops round it and persuades it to go over, manages to get it over to the crew to pick them up, and all 4 of the crew survive and are taken off. And this all happens in a few minutes. And I absolutely love that story. You know, it's absolutely incredible, the Spitfire pilot. I haven't been able to find out who it is. So if anybody does know, I would love to know more about that story. If there is anything at all, that would be fascinating.
Wow. Yeah.
As I say, one Ventura crashes in England at another base, and another crashes in a field. But in these 2 cases, all of the crew survive. And that's really the end of the raid itself. But I think we'll move on now to talk about the results of the raid. So these are images of the damage done to the factory. And I mean, you've seen the earlier image of the factory on fire, the complexes, etc. That damage is extensive. You know, you just don't see this. It's incredibly accurate. It's, as I say, absolutely extensive. The workshops as well as factory complexes are seen as severely damaged, as well as the power station. So there's no power. And apparently the factory workers go on strike immediately after the raid because of the conditions they can't possibly work in. Only a few bombs, a few bombs hit some residential buildings, unfortunately. So it's not 100% accurate, but this time of the war, it's almost an inevitability. You know, accuracy is such. You think about the smoke and confusion during the raids, the huge, also how quickly this is all coming to the crews, you know, that it's going to happen, but it is only a few. And the other thing is that I find incredible is the factory was still recovering in March 1943 when 10 Mosquitoes attack the factory again, knocking it out for a further 6 months. So this factory that produces a third of the radio valves for Nazi Germany is knocked out essentially for about 10 months, which I think is something to be shouted about for the brilliance of the crews and this raid. You don't hear about that, do you? You don't have that very often.
It's high price to pay with these crews that we'll talk about later, but to knock out a third of their production. Do we know whether there was stocks of valves and bulbs kept there as well? Or
there would have been,
So you know, it's job done, really. I mean, it is a war, and amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Neil's is saying the city centre was quite badly hit, and the main street partially wiped out. But it's
I mean, I've got the figures here. Unfortunately, 148 Dutch people were killed during the raid, and 7 German soldiers that would have been manning the guns and the defences. I mean, the thing to consider is with these raids and bombing as such, there is no clean strike. You know, and I mean, you see similar raids, usually the casualties are even higher than that, you know. I don't want to use the word collateral damage, but it's, you know, it's a factor of it. And in terms of the raid knocking out the factory, you know, that is absolutely huge. And one other thing, actually, I just thought I'd mention is that the clock tower at the factory is stopped at 11:32, and it remains like this for the rest of the war. And I kind of like the idea of the occupying troops there looking up and seeing this and getting a reminder.
Every single time they look, they get reminder of the fact, HR, if you like. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, again, just the next slide is talking about, now you might raise your eyebrow about the image on the left, but I will get to that in a second. And so these are the totals. As I say, 14 aircraft were lost. It was 9 Venturas, 4 Bostons, and a Mosquito, which came at a loss rate of 16% overall, which is very high. It's not as high as, say, Operation Chastise, for example, you know, where it's nearly half, it's 47% or something. But it's high for raids. It's not something that could be continued, especially considering.
Yeah, you can't sustain that. You can't do that every raid. You know, when Don Russell was, he was done about the 8th Air Force at the same in sort of May and June 43. You know, that I think it was a month where it was 38% losses. There, you can't. That's not sustainable for very long. It tells you we said at the beginning of the show. It reminds you how in that part of the war, the 42-43 period, there is a lot of loss. There's no way of getting away from it. The costs we're paying are high at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And damaged aircraft as well. I mean, these are various different damages. So you've got 37 Venturas damaged, 13 Bostons, and 3 Mosquitoes. Sorry, I've got 7 seriously wounded. So that's 57% of the force were damaged in some way, which again is massive. And it's worth mentioning again the 20% loss rate of the Venturas. Now, I thought I'd mention as well an interesting thing that I read, that I mentioned the 23 aircraft damaged by bird strikes. Well, apparently one aircraft brought a duck back. Whether the duck, which I think was alive, I don't know what happened to the duck. But I thought that was quite unusual, not something you normally bring back. So, you know, there was a liberated duck out of the raid, shall we say, which I thought is. I
think that deserves a show in its own right. I think that someone's bound to have written a book on that duck. You know, the duck that survived the bombing raid, that was left its family behind in the Netherlands, started a new life in England, and there's got to be a book, if not a movie. There.
I was thinking a movie that I would watch that movie. I would definitely watch that. To clarify,
cartoon or anime.
Cartoon.
I think.
Amazing. Amazing. Just to clarify, that isn't the duck. That duck is a photograph of a duck that was a mascot for the Marines, which I decided to use. So the disclaimer, that isn't the actual duck, but it's a black and white picture of a duck, and I thought I'd use it. So there's a little disclaimer for you. As I say, you know, the main lessons out of this: Ventura is useless. The Mosquitoes a huge success and perfectly suited these sort of raids, which obviously it is. Pelly Fry, who is pictured on the right here, this is slightly later on. He's a group captain in this photo. Receives a DSO, Distinguished Service Order, and survives the war. And apparently after the war, he visited Eindhoven and visited the factory, and proceeded to apologize for the damage that was done. And apparently the director at the time replied, "There are no hard feelings. As you can see, we have better buildings now." Which interesting little anecdote there that I thought I'd add. And there was also DFC for squadron leader McLachlan of 107 Squadron, who during the raid dropped his bombs on one of the defending gun emplacements. So 2 mentions there to those crew members.
And he's got the look of Trevor Howard about him. Like, as soon as that photo came out, he looks a bit like Trevor Howard, or Trevor Howard could have easily played him just after the war. Just a little bit of a look there.
He really does, actually. I didn't notice that when I found this image. But again, I mean, it really looks the part, doesn't he, in this?
Definitely.
So just carrying on to the next section, still sort of rounding up the raid. The crews were heroes. You know, the camera footage was soon put onto Pathé News, and you've got an outtake of one of the Pathé News reels there. It's in the newspapers. It's huge. You know, it's a raid to be celebrated in Britain, especially, as I say, at this fairly bleak time that Bomber Command have got through and hit a really, really important factory and knocked it out significantly. And, you know, I think this adds to a sense of optimism going into 1943, because 43 is a a huge year, isn't it? And what happens at the end of 1942 into 43. And I think this is part of that shift, you know. So this would come not long after the news of the second El Alamein, and it would be, you know what, we're going into Christmas going, things are on the turn. And I think that's another factor to this raid and its success.
But it also raises the question that we talked about right at the beginning of why isn't it better known? Because you know, when we talk about Chastise, and let's not start going down that rabbit hole too much, but there are a lot of questions these days about exactly what that raid achieved, which we can talk about another time. But it's talked about as well. Forget about what it did or didn't achieve. Look at the morale boost it gave the British public, which I'm not going to disagree with. But this does both. It's a morale boost, but it has actually done what it's supposed to have done. I mean, it's tick in the box there. You know, I know the Chastise accomplished what it was supposed to accomplish. It's just that maybe what it accomplished didn't provide quite the result that they anticipated. But I'm wondering why this isn't better known. I mean, I know it's known by the aviation geeks and the people who read about the bombers and the thing, but by the wider public, you know, I don't think it's, you know, it's well known. I think Amiens Prison, I think, is better known.
I'd agree.
Interesting.
I think as well, you know, you got to think with the Dam Busters raid, there is that factor of a quite crazy bonkers weapon, you know, a mine that bounces along water and hugs it, you know.
That's
and
true. Yeah,
this,
it's got that,
you know,
it has that technological side of things, and of course the movie as well. Which I think it's that bit of resourcefulness as well. Is the idea is cool. This is I suppose conventional bombing in the sense there's nothing particularly low level different aircraft, but it's not like there's a particular thing they're introducing or deploying in this raid. It is similar to others in that regard.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's one thing I like doing is finding these raids and putting them out there and trying to, you know, bring them into things like this to go, hey, look, this is incredible, you know, because people do think it's all the Dam Busters, really, you know, which it isn't. There are some absolutely incredible raids, but yeah, really, just to sum up, we'll carry on with this. So
here's this is going to take us up to the monument there. So it's all thanks to Edwin for the footage. I hope he wasn't going that fast when he was taking it. I think that was just to speed the camera in there. But yeah, this is and for those who haven't seen the monument, you'll get to see it in a minute. And yeah, I mean, Don Russell yesterday talked about how the Netherlands is very good at putting up monuments, and how particularly to the aviation side of things, there's lots of crashed Allied aircraft get monuments around the Netherlands and Belgium as well, and how they do seem to regard the war in the air as being as important to memorialize as the war on the ground. And indeed, in this case, they're talking about both the Allied raid and the casualties as well, and it's in the shape of an oyster, which is just, well, it's a wonderful monument.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, you think the Netherlands, as you mentioned earlier, was, you know, the route, you know, the bombers had to go over it generally to get to Germany, especially Hamburg, you know, Berlin, etc. And also, I think, you know, when you think later with Operation Manor, etc., with Bomber Command dropping the food supplies in the bleak winter of 44, 45, I think that's got to add to the memory as well of Bomber Command and the effort, you know, that they put in. But that is an absolutely incredible memorial, isn't it?
Beautiful.
Really, really incredible. Really incredible.
Oops. And I'll let you talk about some of the losses there, and but we've got this other footage again. I'll play that, and because we've established it. The price paid was quite high, but this is the Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery where some of the men are buried. And again, thank you, Edwin, for doing this. And links to Edwin's Twitter feed and website are in the description below, folks. And so this was taken on, I think it was either Saturday or Sunday. I think it was out on certainly at the weekend. He took this footage, so it's fresh from the camera to the World War II TV there.
Gosh, yeah, it's just it's really sobering, isn't it, when you read about this and you do see the graves, and when you see names as well that you're familiar with. 6th of December 42. It's just This is one of them that was hit as it approached the factory. And this is the one that crashed into the building on the premises. As I say, over the target, the smoke, the confusion, and again, why it was not thought of, why there was that huge delay. So you've got 8 minutes from the first bomber bombing to the start of the next attack is a long time. You know, it doesn't sound like a long time, but it is a long time when in a raid of that nature.
I guess it's back to the learning curve, isn't it? Where it's the learning curve is steep, and there are not mistakes. There are improvements that can be made that gradually reduce some of these things. They would plan and go into things, and you know, amazing how so in this raid alone. So you've got aircraft brought down by bird strike, enemy fighters. The damage from the factory, explosion in the factory was a flak as well. Flak,
yep, that was flak and machine gun fire as well.
So you know they're receiving every type of conceivable damage on this single raid, and it's not an enormous raid. And you know it's not thousands of aircraft, and yet the variety of ways they're happening is Saturday. So Edwin's watching Saturday. It was Saturday, Edwin. So again, thank you, Edwin, for doing that. It was
thank you so much.
It's just it's taken it from a really good presentation to just sort of gold star quality just because of this footage. It's perfect. So thanks, Edwin, for doing that.
Yeah, really appreciate this. This is just incredibly moving.
And we would have just ended with that. That was what you provided, James, which would have been fine, but nothing like the actual graves and monuments. So well,
absolutely incredible, and just to say the figures there, 62 aircraft were lost on this raid. Not all of them lie in Holland, of course, because of ones that would have crashed in the sea and no bodies were found. And they're, as I say, memorialized at Runnymede Memorial, which is just another incredibly moving places to visit. It's just I said the monument was built on the 6th of December 2011, and I think it's an incredible memorial, really, summing up everything. But that really is the end of the story, really, for Operation Oyster, which I think has everything. It's an incredible story. It's a success, you know, in terms of hitting the target. It comes at a heavy price. But yeah, absolutely incredible, and it's good to get these stories out there, as I say. And it is a huge, I mean, you summed it up perfectly. Learning curve for the RAF, discovering, you know, the Mosquito, discovering that these raids were possible, but that they needed to be tweaked, you know, and that the Ventura was
the aircraft technology to catch up with the ideas we discussed yesterday with Don Russell. You know, it's all very well having these ideas of long range bombing and multiple aircraft, but you've got to have the aircraft to do it. And 42 is in that bridging era between ideas and getting these ideas through. And you know, when we in last night's show, Don provided the map with the increasing circles of fighter coverage as the war went on, and it sort of tripled in 2 years. It went from a couple of miles to hundreds of miles, and the lessons were learned, and they were learned relatively quickly when you consider the speed of things in the war. Yes, unfortunately, they could always been a bit faster, but it's incredible that the lesson was done. And do you happen to know whether this kind of became a legendary raid within 2 Group and these squadrons? Is it something they have talked about as the years pass? You know, when the new pilots join, of course, Oyster was the one, lads. It would have been something like that.
Oh yeah, they were very proud of it. As I say, 2 Group in the end kind of merged into a couple of other groups, and I think you got the Tactical Air Force out of it included in there. But this was a raid, as I say, at the time that was, you know, revered. It was in the public sphere as well. 2 Group were heroes. Pelly Fry, you know, was a name. All of this sort of stuff. But again, going back on what you say about the air war, you know, I think. I don't know if you agree with me, but it was kind of very similar for the Allies in general. You know, it was a lot of learning curves. It was waiting for technology to kick in. It was waiting for the infrastructure, you know, the building, the factories to come in to churn out this stuff. And that was, and it was time for the Germans, you know, that didn't have that and didn't have that capacity to grow.
And I think, you know, at the end of the day, as long as the learning curve is going up, you're showing the progress. It's if it stays static, if there are no improvements made, that's when you have to look back and go, hang on, could they have done anything better? in every way, in armor development, aircraft development, tactics, everything. Sometimes the curve isn't going up as fast as we'd like, but it is always going up. And I think that's a testament to the amount of geniuses there were working on things in safety systems improvements and bomb sites and the strengthening of aircraft and improvement of aircraft and the improvement of the maintenance of the aircraft and so on and so forth, and the skill sets of the pilots and the skill sets of the air crews. All of that is improving and that's I guess kind of why we won the war. The Great Dominion, just a couple of questions. So the first part was any damage sustained by aircraft flying through delayed action bomb blasts? And then he goes on to say the HE bombs may be refused for 11-second delays. So is that something that you came up with in terms of the?
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely a case. And as I say, there was one Ventura that was hit by the bombs exploding underneath it and causing that damage. Yeah, I mean, I think it's strange, really, that they had these variety of bombs. There were so many different varieties of bombs used on this raid, which was quite strange, especially the instant impact ones. I think that's quite a strange thing to use at low level with aircraft coming up straight behind you. So there's definitely questions there, which is something I would actually like to look into. Whether
perhaps
it was a case
they're thinking that spreading their bets a bit, try a bit of everything, maybe and maybe later on again. There's a refinement later on, whereas at this stage of the war, perhaps they're kind of hedging their bets a bit and trying a bit of thing. We're not sure what's going to do the most damage, so we'll throw a bit of everything at it and kind of not hope for the best. That sounds a bit underprepared, but just assume something will function better, I suppose.
Yeah, no, yeah. I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Well, that was another cracking show. I'll just remind people we've got coming up tomorrow, and I'll come back and say goodbye to you in a second. So tomorrow, folks, we've got 2 shows. So in order to cater for the fact that my next guest, Dr. Tom Lewis, is in Australia, tomorrow's show is at 10 a.m., the first show, UK time, and we're talking about the Japanese raids on North Australia, which is something I didn't know a huge amount before I looked into it for this show there. So Tom Lewis has been doing some great work in Australia about the Japanese raids on that country and fighting, Darwin. He's written a series of books, so it's going to be an introduction to Tom Lewis's work. And then later in the day, the normal time, 7 p.m. UK, we got Luke Truxell coming on talking a more generic sort of general talk. We're looking at the bombing of Romania, which will include Ploesti, but also look at some of the stages in development of that technique. So we're talking about the same theatre, ETO, but Romania was often bombed from the other direction in Italy. But that'll be Luke, and Luke is highly regarded as an aviation expert. So another cracking guest. So Dr. Tom Lewis and Luke Truxell tomorrow. And then we can move on to Tony Redding the following day about April 45 bombing of Germany. And then finally on the last day, it's B-29s attacking Japan with Ian W. Toll, who, if you remember, did the Iwo Jima kind of overview show a few weeks ago. So a cracking lineup of people again. But right now, it remains me to say thank you very much to James for joining us. Reminding everybody, don't please forget to share what we're doing on social media. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Consider becoming a patron so we can make more of these shows. And yeah, I've got so many weeks of shows coming up. It's just been crazy how many people I'm contacting and saying, yes, I'd love to come and speak on your shows. It's great. So I couldn't have possibly imagined 11 months ago when I started this that I'd be getting some of the caliber of guests I've been getting now. So really, really gratifying that people are enjoying appearing on this, because we love doing it. So thanks very much, James. And I'll have to come and have a beer with you one day when I can get back to Essex again.
Yeah.
You're only a few miles away from where my folks live, so I'd love to go back there. I love Wivenhoe and all the areas down there.
It's backyard there as well. Yeah, definitely.
So we'll have a beer one day. But anyway, thanks everybody for watching. I will see you all again tomorrow. So 2 shows, 10 a.m. UK and 7 p.m. UK. I will see you then. Thanks, James. That was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.